The blue label made Anne Crossley understand, with a clarity more humiliating than any shouted accusation could have been, that her childhood had acquired a number, 47, the appraiser said quietly as he bent over the small rosewood workbox on the escritoire. His pencil had already travelled across chairs, side tables, a French clock that had belonged to Anne's grandfather, and the narrow mahogany cabinet where her mother had once kept household accounts. Now the man tied a square of blue paper to the cracked brass clasp of the workbox and wrote the number again in his ledger. 47, Hampshire, May 1818, and nearly everything inside Crossley House was being transformed into ink, estimates, and eventual bids. Anne stood beside the window, with her hands loosely folded. She had learned years ago that stillness was sometimes the last possession no creditor could inventory. "You may continue, Mr. Hale," she said, when the appraiser glanced toward her with the embarrassment of a decent man performing an indecent task. "There's no need to apologize for doing what you were engaged to do." He lowered his head. "Yes, Miss Crossley." The workbox had belonged to her mother. Its monetary value was small. Its rosewood was scratched near one hinge, and the brass clasp had been cracked for at least 12 years. Sir Josiah had once called it a piece of feminine clutter. Anne had not corrected him. If her father had understood that it mattered, it might have vanished with the better silver 3 winters ago. Footsteps sounded in the entrance hall, followed by the butler's voice, more formal than it had been for any visitor in months. Anne turned. Her father came in first, his coat immaculate, his expression arranged into the bland confidence he wore whenever circumstances had become most dangerous. Behind him entered Gabriel Gainsford, Duke of Dunwich. Anne had seen him only twice before, both times across rooms crowded with people more important than she was. At close range, his reserve was more striking than his rank. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat without ornament, and carried himself with the quiet economy of a man who had no need to advertise authority. Society said he had worn dark colors almost continuously since the death of his wife 20 months earlier. Society said many things about grieving men, because grief made people curious when it could not make them kind. His gaze moved once across the room. It paused on the blue labels, then it settled on Anne, not on her gown, which was 2 seasons old, not on the workbox, on her. "Miss Crossley," he said, "Your Grace." Sir Josiah gestured impatiently toward the adjoining bookroom. "We'll have privacy." Mr. Hale closed his ledger at once. 2 servants, who had been moving a gilt chair toward the wall, stopped. Sir Josiah looked at them as if their presence were the true inconvenience of the morning. Everyone out. Anne moved with the others. "Not you," her father said. She stopped. Something in his tone made Mr. Hale look at her again. The Duke noticed that look. Anne could not tell whether he understood it, but his face changed by the smallest degree. Sir Josiah waited until the door closed behind the servants and appraiser. Then he crossed to the desk and placed both hands upon it. "The matter is simple." Gabriel remained standing. "Debts rarely are. This one is." Sir Josiah smiled without humor. £18,000. Anne's breath did not change, but something cold settled behind her ribs. She had known the estate was failing. She had known there were mortgages, notes, delayed payments, and tradesmen who had begun requesting settlement before delivery. She had not known the figure, £18,000. Sir Josiah did not look at her. "The obligation to the Gainsford estate matures this month. I cannot meet it." Gabriel's expression remained unreadable. "That was clear from your letter." Then we need not waste time pretending astonishment. I am not astonished. Gabriel's gaze shifted toward the blue labels visible through the open inner door. I am wondering why you continued spending as though nothing had changed. Sir Josiah's mouth tightened. We are not here to discuss household philosophy. No, we're here because your household philosophy has become my financial concern. Anne looked down before her father could see the flicker of something dangerously close to amusement in her eyes. It vanished quickly. Nothing about the room allowed laughter. Sir Josiah walked to the sideboard, although there was nothing on it now except dust where silver had once stood. I have land that cannot be liquidated quickly without ruinous loss. I have assets already pledged. I have obligations to people beneath this roof. What I require is time and an arrangement that preserves both families from unnecessary embarrassment. You asked for an extension, Gabriel said. I declined, because you prefer certainty. Because 3 previous assurances proved false. Anne looked at her father. He did not deny it. That frightened her more than the debt itself. Sir Josiah drew a breath. When he spoke again, his voice became smoother. There is another form of certainty. Gabriel waited. Anne felt the room narrow around them. Her father finally looked at her. It was not a father's look. It was the look Mr. Hale had given the mahogany cabinet before writing down its condition. Anne is 28, Sir Josiah said, well born, properly educated, unencumbered by scandal. She would make an entirely suitable duchess. Silence followed. Anne heard a carriage passing on the road beyond the windows. Gabriel did not move. What? He asked softly. Does your daughter's suitability have to do with £18,000? Sir Josiah seemed relieved that they had reached the point. You require a wife eventually. Everyone knows it. The duchy requires continuity. Anne requires establishment. I require release from the obligation. A marriage settlement could resolve all 3 matters without spectacle. Anne stared at him. There was no auction block, no raised voices, no vulgar bargain shouted before strangers that almost made it worse. Her father had found the language respectable men used when they wished to make cruelty sound administrative. Gabriel's face lost what little expression it had possessed. You are suggesting that I marry Miss Crossley in exchange for extinguishing your debt. I'm suggesting a family arrangement. You're describing your daughter as consideration. Sir Josiah's patience snapped at the edges. Don't be melodramatic. Aristocratic marriages have balanced estates for centuries. That doesn't make your phrasing less ugly. Ugly phrasing doesn't alter arithmetic. Gabriel's eyes went to Anne. She had expected pity. She would have despised pity. Instead, she found attention. Severe, controlled attention, as though he had decided that nothing further should be said in the room without acknowledging that she was there. Miss Crossley is not property, he said. Sir Josiah gave a short exhale. Ideals won't stop the inventory. Through the half-open door, Anne could see the corner of the rosewood workbox. The blue label hung from its broken clasp. 47. Her father continued. If the creditors proceed, this house is stripped. The remaining servants dismissed. The leases pressured. And every person dependent on this family pays for the luxury of your moral disgust. You can call the arrangement whatever pleases you. The consequences remain. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Anne could see the trap because she had lived inside variations of it all her life. Her father had not merely offered her. He had surrounded the offer with servants, tenants, debts, duty and shame until refusal could be made to look like selfishness. Gabriel turned toward her fully. Miss Crossley. Sir Josiah frowned. There's no need to involve Anne in every detail. Gabriel did not look at him. There is every need. Anne raised her eyes to his. For the first time that morning, the pressure inside her chest changed. It did not lessen. It simply became hers again. Gabriel's voice remained quiet. "Do you wish me to leave?" Her father stared. "What?" Gabriel continued to look only at Anne. "If you don't want this discussion continued in your presence, I'll leave. If you want it ended entirely, say so. I won't bargain over you while you stand silent beside us." Sir Josiah stepped forward. "Anne understands family duty." Anne looked at him, then back at Gabriel. The Duke waited. He did not rescue her from answering. He did not answer for her. That mattered more than she wanted it to. "No," she said. Gabriel's brows shifted almost imperceptibly. "No, you don't want me to leave." "I don't." Anne unfolded her hands. Her palms were cold, but her voice was steady. "If my future is being discussed as part of an account, I intend to hear every term." "Anne," Sir Josiah warned. She turned to him. "You've already said enough to make silence useless." Then she faced Gabriel again. The Duke's expression had not softened, but something in his posture had. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. It was too soon to name it, and Anne had no intention of naming anything she had not earned the right to trust. She glanced once toward the workbox, beyond the door, toward the little blue square that had turned memory into lot number 47. Then she looked back at the man her father expected to turn her into £18,000. "If I say yes," she asked, "will you know the difference between my choice and my father's price?" For 3 days after Gabriel left Crossley House, Anne discovered that £18,000 could fill a room without anyone speaking the number aloud. It sat between her father and the solicitor at breakfast. It followed Lady Crossley into the drawing-room when she complained that creditors had made the household intolerably gloomy. It seemed present, even when no account books were open and no blue labels were being tied to furniture. On the 4th morning, 2 solicitors arrived within half an hour of one another. Mr. Peake represented the Gainsford interests. Mr. Bellamy, an older Hampshire solicitor, whose practice had once handled a small trust established by Anne's maternal grandfather, came specifically to explain what the proposed settlement meant for her. Gabriel had insisted upon it. Sir Josiah had objected. Anne had learned both facts before the men had removed their coats. The conference began in the book room, where the first proposal had been made, although the doors stood open to the adjoining morning room, and Lady Crossley sat there with embroidery she never touched. Anne occupied the chair nearest the table. Sir Josiah seemed to regard the arrangement as an irritation. Gabriel, seated opposite Anne, regarded it as settled. Mr. Peake summarized the principal terms without drama. Upon the marriage taking place, the specific obligation of £18,000 owed by Sir Josiah to the Gainsford estate would be released according to the marriage settlement. Other Crossley liabilities would remain Sir Josiah's responsibility. Anne's small maternal property, including income arising from funds placed years earlier under trustees, would be secured for her separate use through provisions, Mr. Bellamy explained with slow precision. Nothing in the arrangement would give Sir Josiah a new claim upon that income, merely because Anne became a duchess. That qualification is unnecessary, Sir Josiah said. I have never claimed Anne's money. Anne looked at him. You asked last Michaelmas whether the trustees might advance you 2 years of income. Sir Josiah's face changed. For the estate, you asked whether they might advance it to you. Anne, lady, Crossley murmured from the next room. There's no purpose in making every family discussion sound adversarial. Anne turned slightly toward her. Then perhaps we should stop having family discussions in which I'm the only asset required to be agreeable. Silence followed. Mr. Bellamy lowered his eyes to the papers. Gabriel did not. He looked at Anne with the same severe attention he had given her on the first day. But there was something different in it now. Not approval exactly. Approval would have felt too much like another judgment to pass. It was closer to recognition. Sir Josiah pushed back in his chair. This is precisely why such matters should be handled by men who understand consequence. Gabriel spoke before Anne could answer. Miss Crossley understands the consequence better than anyone at this table. Sir Josiah gave him a hard look. Your Grace, with respect, she has no experience of estate finance. She has experience of being discussed as part of it. Mr. Peake cleared his throat and continued. The financial clauses took another half-hour. Anne listened carefully and asked questions when language became obscure. She wanted to know who would control the income settled for her use. She wanted to know whether her father could borrow against it. She wanted written confirmation that no invitation, recommendation, or financial introduction from House Gainsford would be presumed merely because of the marriage. Sir Josiah objected to that last request with enough force to make Anne understand she had chosen correctly. You're making me sound like a petitioner, he said. I am making certain I don't become your letter of introduction, Anne replied. Gabriel's mouth moved. It was not a smile, but it came close. When the solicitors had finished with the property terms, Mr. Bellamy requested a private explanation with Anne. Lady Crossley remaining within sight in the adjoining room for propriety. Sir Josiah attempted to stay. Anne refused. I'd like to hear what concerns me without having my answers supplied first. I'm your father. That is not the same as being my mind. Sir Josiah left with the stiff dignity of a man forced to pretend departure had been his idea. Gabriel rose as well. Anne stopped him. Your Grace. He turned. I have questions for you that aren't for the solicitors. He studied her for a moment. Do you want Mr. Bellamy to remain? Anne considered it. Yes. Gabriel sat again, Mr. Bellamy moved discreetly to the far end of the table and began arranging papers he did not need to arrange. Anne folded her hands in her lap. If this marriage takes place, what do you expect from me? Gabriel's expression became cautious. You will be Duchess of Dunwich. That's a title. I asked what you expect from me. He was silent long enough that she knew the question had reached somewhere the settlement papers had not. Courtesy, he said at last. Honesty when possible. Discretion where the household requires it. Obedience? His gaze sharpened. The law gives a husband considerable authority whether either of us enjoys the fact. That isn't an answer. No. He glanced toward the window, then back to her. I don't want a wife who obeys because I have made disagreement impossible. Anne absorbed that. Affection? No. The answer came too quickly. You're very certain. It would be unreasonable to ask it. People ask unreasonable things every day. I won't ask that. Something in his voice changed at the final word. The room seemed quieter around it. Anne wondered what sort of marriage he had known before widowhood, and what had taught him to speak of affection as though requesting it might be a form of injury. She did not ask. She did ask the more difficult question. And my bedchamber. Mr. Bellamy became intensely interested in the edge of a folded document. Gabriel did not look away. I won't enter it unless you welcome me. Anne searched his face for embarrassment, impatience, or masculine offense. She found none. You understand I'm asking because I don't intend to exchange one kind of obligation for another. I understand. That promise won't be in Mr. Peake's settlement. No, his voice remained level. It will be mine. For the first time since her father had spoken of marriage, Anne felt some small portion of the future become solid beneath her feet. Not safe. She was not foolish enough to confuse promises with guarantees. But clear, she nodded. Then I have one further condition. My father is not to have automatic access to my income, Wilderton, your influence, or your creditors, merely because he is my father. Gabriel's eyes held hers. Agreed. Without asking why. I think I know why. That sounds dangerously close to confidence. It's a defect of rank. The answer was so dry that Anne stared at him. I had supposed dukes were trained out of defects before reaching adulthood. Gabriel's mouth curved. Then, to her astonishment, he laughed. It was brief and low, but unmistakable. The sound seemed to surprise him more than it surprised her. His expression closed almost at once. Not coldly, but as though he had opened a door by accident and feared what might be standing beyond it. Anne looked down before he could see how much she had noticed. Well, she said, if I'm to marry the only creditor in Hampshire polite enough to ask permission, I suppose I must allow him one imperfection. Gabriel looked at her again. This time the almost smile remained. Only one? We've known one another 4 days. I'm allowing for future discoveries. Mr. Bellamy made a small sound that might have been a cough. By late afternoon, the solicitors had prepared revised drafts. Anne did not sign immediately. She read every page she was given. Only when Mr. Bellamy confirmed that the provisions reflected what had been discussed did she place her name where indicated. Sir Josiah watched from across the room, satisfaction slowly returning to his face. Lady Crossley exhaled as though a social inconvenience had finally been removed. Anne set down the pen. On her way upstairs, she passed the rosewood workbox. The appraisers had not yet returned to complete the inventory, and the blue label still hung from the cracked brass clasp. Anne untied it carefully. Lot number 47. She opened the workbox, laid the label beneath the shallow removable tray, and closed the lid over it. The clasp caught imperfectly, as it always had. She pressed it until it held. By the time she returned to the bookroom, Gabriel stood near the window, while Sir Josiah spoke to Mr. Peake in a low, eager voice. Anne took her place at the table and signed the final draft. Sir Josiah smiled. Gabriel did not. On the 9th morning, after Gabriel Gainsford first entered Crossley House, Anne stood in the small parish church where she had been baptized and listened to a clergyman pronounce words that would alter nearly everything society was permitted to call her. The church was not crowded. Sir Josiah had wanted enough witnesses to make the match respectable, but not enough to encourage questions about its haste. Lady Crossley had chosen a pale gown for Anne that was elegant without suggesting celebration beyond what circumstance could support. Anne had accepted the gown because arguing about silk seemed absurd when the larger decision had already been made. Beneath one gloved hand, she held the small prayer book she had used since girlhood. Her mother's rosewood workbox waited among the few personal possessions packed for Wilderton Park. The blue label, marked 47, remained hidden inside it, beneath the removable tray where Anne had placed it herself. Gabriel stood beside her in a dark coat cut with severe precision. He looked neither triumphant nor reluctant. That steadiness should have reassured her. Instead, it reminded Anne that he had become practiced at carrying things no one else could see. She knew only what society knew about his widowhood, and what he had allowed her to observe during their negotiations. His first wife had been dead 20 months. He did not speak of affection as something he intended to ask from another woman. The clergyman continued. Anne answered when required. So did Gabriel. When the vows reached the moment that would make refusal impossible without scandal, Anne felt her father's attention from the front pew. She did not look at him. She looked at Gabriel instead. His eyes met hers. There was no command in them, no reminder of the £18,000. He waited through the briefest pause, as if the church contained only the question before her and the right she still possessed to answer it. Anne spoke clearly. The ceremony moved on. By the time they stepped from the church into the mild Hampshire light, she was no longer Miss Crossley. She was Anne Gainsford, Duchess of Dunwich. The transformation occurred so cleanly in law and custom that it almost offended her. A title had changed in less than an hour. Memory had not. Sir Josiah came down the church steps behind them, visibly lighter than he had looked in months. Mr. Peake, the Gainsford solicitor, had confirmed that morning that the agreed settlement would take effect upon the marriage. The specific obligation of £18,000 owed by Sir Josiah to the Gainsford estate was now released under its terms. Sir Josiah still had other creditors, other liabilities, and other choices to answer for. Yet the largest weight pressing directly against Crossley House had been removed, and he wore relief badly. "Well," he said, joining Anne and Gabriel near the waiting carriage, "that settles the matter rather handsomely." Anne felt the words before she understood them. Gabriel did not turn immediately. "Which matter?" Sir Josiah gave a thin smile. "There's no need to be delicate now. The arrangement has served everyone." "Has it? My daughter is a duchess. Your house has a wife where it required one. My obligation is extinguished. I should think even you can appreciate efficiency." Gabriel's gaze sharpened. "You may appreciate the financial result as much as you like. You will not speak of her grace as though she were the instrument that purchased it." The new form of address landed strangely in Anne's chest. Her grace, not because the rank delighted her, but because Gabriel had used it not to elevate himself, but to draw a boundary her father could not casually cross. Sir Josiah's expression tightened. "She is still my daughter." "Yes." Gabriel's voice remained quiet. "That is why you should require less reminding." Lady Crossley approached before Sir Josiah could answer, her smile fixed for the benefit of the remaining witnesses. Anne chose not to prolong the exchange. Public victory would have tasted too much like dependence upon Gabriel's rank, and she wanted something harder than that. She wanted the right to decide when her father's words deserved an answer. "The carriage is waiting," she said. Gabriel looked at her. "Are you ready?" It was such a simple question that she almost laughed at the complexity of answering it. "As ready as I'm likely to become standing outside a church." His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "Then we should go." Anne had instructed that only a limited number of personal items travel with her immediately. Dresses, books, correspondence, a few pieces of linen, and the rosewood workbox. She refused to empty Crossley House, simply because she now possessed a greater title than the woman who had lived there that morning. When a footman carried the workbox toward the carriage, Sir Josiah glanced at it without recognition. Anne was grateful for that. Some objects survived precisely because powerful men failed to understand what they were worth. Gabriel handed Anne into the carriage with the formal courtesy expected between a newly married couple observed by servants and family. His hand supported hers, for no longer than necessity required. Once the door closed, the church, her father, and Crossley House began to recede behind them. Wilderton Park lay roughly 16 miles away. The journey would take several hours over Hampshire roads. For the first mile, neither spoke. Anne watched hedgerows pass the window and felt the silence change as the carriage moved farther from the house where she had spent 28 years. She had expected relief. Instead, she felt a grief too shapeless to name. A home could fail a person and still be a home. Gabriel sat opposite her, leaving sufficient space that his presence did not feel like an occupation. "Would you prefer conversation?" he asked at last. Anne turned from the window. "Not yet." "Very well." He did not sound offended. He did not fill the silence to prove he could make it comfortable. He simply accepted her answer. That, more than polished reassurance would have done, allowed Anne to breathe. Some time later, the carriage struck a rut shallow enough not to alarm the horses, but sharp enough to shift the smaller luggage secured beside the opposite seat. The rosewood workbox slid toward the edge. Anne reached for it. Gabriel moved at the same instant. Their hands met over the lid. His fingers touched hers just above the cracked brass clasp. The contact was accidental, brief and startling, precisely because nothing about it had been arranged. Anne stilled. So did Gabriel. Neither withdrew at once. His hand was warmer than hers. She became aware of the closeness between them, of the quiet carriage, of the fact that this man was now her husband, even though almost nothing between them resembled what she had once imagined marriage might be. Gabriel's eyes lifted from their joined hands to her face. There was no entitlement in his expression. There was awareness, the same awareness that had appeared in her, reflected back with enough restraint to make it more dangerous, not less. Anne moved first, drawing the workbox safely toward herself. Gabriel released it immediately. "Your clasp is damaged," he said. Anne looked down at the old break. "It has been damaged for years." "Do you want it repaired?" "No." He appeared to consider asking why. He did not. Anne rested the workbox beside her, one hand over its lid. The blue label remained hidden within, exactly where she had placed it. She wondered whether she would someday tell Gabriel what it represented. Not today. Today had already required enough truths. Outside, the landscape widened as they approached land belonging to the Gainsford estate. The realization should have made Anne feel smaller. Instead, she found herself thinking of the way Gabriel had stopped his question when she asked for silence, and of the way he had removed his hand the instant she moved hers. Rank surrounded him. Restraint seemed to belong to him by choice. She did not yet know which would prove stronger. Near the end of the journey, Gabriel looked toward the road ahead. "Wilderton is beyond the next rise." Anne followed his gaze. "Should I be afraid?" He turned back to her. "Of the house? Of being expected to belong to it immediately?" Something passed across his face. "No one will require that." The answer was gentle enough to unsettle her. Anne looked forward again as the carriage crested the rise. Wilderton Park appeared beyond broad lawns and mature trees, imposing in stone and symmetry, a house made for generations rather than individuals. Somewhere inside it were rooms shaped by another duchess's habits, servants, trained under another woman's authority, and memories Anne had neither created nor earned the right to disturb. Gabriel watched the house with an expression she could not read. "There is one room," he said after a moment, "that has remained closed for nearly 2 years. Anne looked at him. He offered nothing more. the carriage rolled toward Wilderton, carrying the new Duchess of Dunwich toward a household that still belonged, in ways no settlement could define, to the woman who had died before her. Wilderton Park received Anne with all the ceremony appropriate to a new duchess, and none of the intimacy that might have made the ceremony comforting. The housekeeper, Mrs. Vale, met the carriage beneath the stone portico, with the senior servants arranged behind her in careful order. Footmen stood rigid beneath the carved arch. Housemaids waited farther back. The butler bowed deeply when Gabriel stepped down, then bowed again when Anne descended. "Welcome to Wilderton, Your Grace." The title still felt borrowed when spoken by strangers. Anne acknowledged the household with as much composure as she could manage. After several hours in a carriage, and less than a day of marriage, Gabriel did not rush her through the introductions. He allowed Mrs. Vale to name each senior servant, and waited while Anne repeated the names she meant to remember. That small patience mattered. At Crossley House, people had often moved around her, as though she were a piece of furniture. Everyone assumed would remain where it had been left. Here, at least, the servants looked to her, because rank required it. Whether respect would follow was another question. Her rooms occupied the south side of the principal floor and had been prepared with flowers, fresh linen, and more space than Anne knew what to do with. The rosewood workbox was carried upstairs with her other personal belongings and placed on a writing table near the window at her request. Its cracked brass clasp remained unchanged. The blue label marked 47 remained hidden beneath the removable tray. Anne touched the lid once, then turned away. She had not crossed 16 miles to spend her first days staring backward. By the second morning, she began to understand Wilderton's peculiar silence. It was not the silence of neglect. Fires were laid where fires should be laid. Silver was polished. Meals appeared exactly when expected. Bells were answered before impatience could form. Yet the household moved as though an invisible boundary ran through certain corridors. Some doors were used constantly. Others remained untouched. No servant crossed those thresholds unless necessity demanded it. Anne noticed, because she had spent years learning the habits of houses whose owners preferred not to notice their own habits. On the third day, she found the east morning room. The doors stood closed at the end of a bright gallery overlooking the south lawn. A small table nearby held fresh flowers, but the handles themselves had the dull look of brass rarely touched. Mrs. Vale, walking beside Anne with a list of household matters, slowed when Anne stopped. "That room isn't presently in use, Your Grace." Anne studied the door. "For repairs, Mrs." Vale's expression changed so slightly that another woman might have missed it. "No, Your Grace." Anne waited. The housekeeper looked toward the windows. Her late grace favored the room in winter. That was enough. Anne did not ask more. "Then we'll leave it for now." Relief passed over Mrs. Vale's face. Anne pretended not to see it. At luncheon, Gabriel spoke little. He asked whether the servants had made her comfortable and whether Mrs. Vale had shown her the household accounts. Anne answered both questions. Then she asked, "May I alter my rooms if I wish?" "Of course. May I alter other household arrangements?" Gabriel set down his glass. "You are Duchess of Dunwich. That sounds very grand, but I'm asking whether you mean it." His gaze held hers. "I do." Anne considered him. "Including rooms your first wife used." The pause was brief but unmistakable. "Yes." He gave the answer evenly, though his shoulders had gone still. "If you want the east morning room, you may have it." Anne looked down at her plate for a moment. I don't want to take it from anyone. There is no one to take it from. The words were controlled, too controlled. Anne lifted her eyes again. Memory can occupy a room very effectively. Gabriel's expression tightened. You're not required to preserve hers. And I'm not required to erase it. He said nothing. Anne continued more gently. I don't need to sit where she sat merely to prove I belong here, but neither do I think a room should remain closed forever because someone loved it. His eyes shifted toward the window. You're very certain about that? No, I'm certain only that dust is not the same thing as devotion. Something in his face changed. Not anger, not quite pain, more like the quiet impact of a truth he had deliberately avoided giving language. Anne did not press. She had no right to force grief into confession simply because she had married the man carrying it. May I have the room aired? She asked. Gabriel looked back at her. If that's what you want. It is. Then yes. That afternoon, Mrs. Vale opened the east morning room for the first time since before Anne arrived. The curtains were drawn back, windows were unlatched. Fresh air moved over faded blue upholstery, a small writing desk, shelves of books, and a chaise positioned near the fireplace. Nothing was shrouded, which somehow made the stillness more intimate. The room had not been abandoned, it had been paused. Anne did not sit on the chaise. She did not open drawers or inspect the books, as if searching for evidence of the woman who had lived there. Instead, she chose a plain chair near the doorway and asked that a small side table be moved beside it. Not the writing desk, Your Grace? Mrs. Vale asked. No, leave it where it is. The housekeeper nodded, and this time her expression held something less guarded. By evening, the room smelled of clean air rather than closure. Anne remained there after the servants withdrew, reading a letter from Mr. Bellamy concerning one minor point of her maternal trust. The light began to fade. She considered ringing for another candle, then decided she had enough to finish the page. A shadow crossed the doorway. Gabriel stood there. He did not step inside immediately. His gaze traveled over the open curtains, the moved side table, the untouched writing desk, and finally Anne. Mrs. Vale told me you had the room opened. I hope she wasn't reporting a crime. No, his voice was quiet. She seemed relieved. Anne folded the letter. So was the room. His mouth almost moved. He remained at the threshold. You didn't change much. I said I wanted it aired. I didn't say I wanted to conquer it. That earned the smallest curve at one corner of his mouth. He entered then, but only as far as the mantel. Anne watched his eyes settle briefly on the chaise near the fire. The restraint in his face deepened. She turned her attention back to the letter, granting him privacy without leaving. A minute passed. Then, too, when Anne glanced up again, Gabriel had crossed to a side table where an unlit candle stood. He struck a taper from the fire, lit the candle, and carried it toward her, instead of placing it at the writing desk, the obvious place for anyone accustomed to the old arrangement. He set it beside the chair Anne had chosen, near the door. The light is better here, he said. Anne looked at the candle, then at him. He had remembered where she preferred to sit after seeing it only once. The awareness moved through her more quietly than their accidental touch in the carriage. But it settled deeper. Thank you. Gabriel inclined his head. You're welcome. He should have left then. He did not. Anne did not invite him to sit. The space between them held no awkwardness, only something watchful and new. At last she said, You told me no one would require me to belong here immediately. Yes, I believe you meant it. His gaze lowered for an instant. I did. That doesn't mean I intend to remain a guest forever. Gabriel looked at her sharply. Anne held his eyes. I won't erase your wife, but I won't live around her absence as though the rest of us are trespassing. His face went still again. For several heartbeats, she thought she had gone too far. Then he looked toward the chaise. She became ill in this room. Anne did not move. He continued before she could answer. It began as a fever. I was away. His voice remained controlled, but the words seemed to cost him. By the time I returned, she was gravely ill. Anne felt the question rise and refused to ask it. Not yet, not because she lacked curiosity, but because trust demanded discipline as much as tenderness. Gabriel noticed her silence. You're not going to ask what happened, not unless you want to tell me. Something passed through his expression so quickly she almost missed it. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude he did not wish to owe. Not tonight, he said, then not tonight. His gaze returned to the candle beside her chair. You can use the room whenever you wish. Anne looked around at the open curtains, the untouched desk, and the chair she had chosen for herself. So can you? Gabriel met her eyes. He gave no answer, but neither did he retreat at once. When he finally left, Anne remained where she was until the candle burned lower. The room was still full of memory, yet for the first time it no longer felt entirely closed to the living. The next morning, a letter arrived from Sir Josiah Crossley, asking the Duke of Dunwich for an introduction to a London lender. Sir Josiah's letter was waiting beside Anne's breakfast plate when she entered the morning room. Its seal already broken by no one, and its handwriting unmistakable even before she read the direction. She paused before touching it. The East morning room had been opened for only a few days, and yet the household had already begun treating it differently. Curtains were drawn each morning. A fire was laid when the air turned cool. The chair Anne had chosen near the doorway remained where she preferred it, and someone had placed fresh paper beside the candle Gabriel had lit for her 2 evenings before. Nothing had been erased. Nothing had been conquered. The room had simply begun to breathe again. Gabriel stood near the window with a cup of coffee, reading another letter. He glanced toward the Crossley seal. From your father? Yes. Anne sat and opened it. The first lines contained apologies without regret. Sir Josiah wrote of pressures Anne surely understood, odd obligations that could not simply be ignored, and the danger of allowing temporary embarrassment to become permanent damage to the family name. By the 3rd paragraph, courtesy gave way to purpose. He wanted Gabriel to provide an introduction to a London lender known to deal discreetly with gentlemen of standing. Sir Josiah described the favour as minor. He described the Duke of Dunwich's name as reassurance rather than security. He described Anne's new position as a fortunate bridge between families. Anne read the final sentence twice. Then she laid the page flat. Gabriel did not ask to see it. What does he want? Your name. Gabriel's expression altered. In what form? An introduction to a lender in London. Apparently your acquaintance would reassure the man that my father remains a respectable risk. Do I know the lender? He assumes you do. That is ambitious of him. Ambition has never required evidence in my father. Gabriel came to the table, but did not sit until Anne gestured toward the chair opposite her. Do you want me to refuse? She looked up. The question was so simple that it took her a moment to understand what was absent from it. He had not said he would handle the matter. He had not announced that Sir Josiah would never receive another favour. He had asked what she wanted. Anne folded the letter once along its existing crease. Yes, then I'll refuse, without explaining that the refusal comes from me. Gabriel considered that. Do you want him to know? I want him to understand that marriage did not turn me into a corridor through which he may walk into your influence. Then he should know. Anne studied him. You could refuse on your own authority. I could. It would be easier. For whom? That stopped her. Gabriel set his coffee aside. If I refuse without mentioning you, he may decide I am merely difficult and try again through you. If I tell him that we discussed the request and that you do not wish your position used for financial introductions, the boundary is clearer. Anne felt a small, unexpected loosening inside her. You make it sound very reasonable. I occasionally manage reason. I was beginning to suspect that was another defect of rank. The faintest smile touched his mouth. You are becoming bold, Your Grace. I was bold before. No one important had noticed. His gaze settled on her more fully. There was no laughter this time, but there was something warmer than amusement. I noticed. The answer should not have mattered as much as it did. Anne looked back at her father's letter and forced her attention toward the safer subject. Tell him no. I will, and tell him I said it. As you wish. Later that afternoon, after the letter had gone to be copied into Gabriel's correspondence book and dispatched, Anne carried her mother's rosewood workbox to the east morning room. She had moved it there herself from her private chamber, though she had not yet decided whether it would remain. The workbox looked modest against Wilderton's polished furniture. Its cracked brass clasp caught unevenly. One corner bore a pale mark where the varnish had worn away years before. Gabriel found her seated beside it after returning from the estate office. He stopped in the doorway. Am I interrupting? No. Anne had opened the lid. Threads, old needles, a packet of buttons, 2 faded ribbons, and several small compartments remained much as they had when her mother was alive. Beneath the removable tray lay the square of blue paper. Anne lifted it out. Gabriel recognized it almost immediately. The inventory label. Lot number 47. He entered the room slowly. You kept it? Yes. Why? Anne turned the label between her fingers. Because I nearly threw it away. Gabriel waited. She appreciated that he did not rush to fill silence simply because he had asked a question. When I removed it from the box, I thought I wanted never to see it again, she continued. Then I realized that was too easy. Easy? Forgetting what people are capable of when they call something necessary. She looked down at the blue square. Mr. Hale was not cruel. The creditors were not cruel merely because they wanted payment. Even my father would say he was being practical. Everyone can make an ugly thing sound clean if they call it necessity long enough. Gabriel's face became more serious, and the label reminds you that necessity is not permission. The words remained between them. Anne glanced toward the workbox. My mother kept letters in here. Receipts. Buttons she meant to replace. Things no one else valued because they were useful only to her. When Mr. Hale tied a number to the clasp, I understood how quickly usefulness can become price. Gabriel's eyes moved to the label in her hand. May I see it? Anne hesitated only briefly, then extended it. He took the square by its edge, careful not to brush her fingers. The restraint itself became noticeable. He examined the handwritten number, the appraiser's initials, and the small notation of the date. It is an ugly little thing. I thought so, and yet you kept it. Some reminders are supposed to be ugly. He looked at her. You expect your father to try again. Yes. With money, with whatever he believes I can be persuaded to provide. Gabriel returned his attention to the label. I won't allow him to use you. Anne's posture changed before she could prevent it. He saw. That was badly phrased, he said. She raised one brow, remarkably quickly recognized. "I am learning." "Then try again." He gave the label back to her. "I will not assist him in using your name, income, or position against your wishes." Better, much better. Anne took the paper. Gabriel's fingers released it immediately. She looked down, but instead of putting the label away, she held it loosely in her palm. "Thank you. For the wording or the decision?" "Both." Silence returned. Gabriel's gaze fell to her hand. "May I?" Anne looked up. His hand had lifted slightly, but he had not touched her. For one confused heartbeat, she thought he wanted the label again. Then she understood. Her pulse altered. She nodded. "Yes." Gabriel placed 2 fingers gently beneath her open hand and folded her fingers over the blue paper. The gesture was small enough that anyone entering the room might have mistaken it for nothing. Anne did not. His touch was deliberate this time. Warm. Careful. He was not taking the evidence from her, or rescuing her from what it meant. He was returning it to her possession, and closing her hand around it, as if acknowledging that the choice to keep it belonged entirely to her. His fingers remained against hers for only a moment after her hand had closed. Neither of them moved. Anne became aware of the fire, the quiet room, the uneven beat of her own pulse, and Gabriel's eyes on her face. Something had changed since the accidental contact in the carriage. That touch had surprised them. This one had been asked for. Chosen. Gabriel withdrew first, slowly enough that the absence of his hand registered almost as clearly as its presence. Anne opened her fingers and looked at the label again. "You are becoming dangerously considerate." His expression softened. "Another defect. I should begin a list." "Please don't. I have an estate to manage." Anne smiled despite herself. A footman appeared at the doorway before either could say more. He carried a small silver tray with a folded note. "For Her Grace, from Lady Crossley." Anne accepted it. Gabriel made no move to read over her shoulder. The note was shorter than Sir Josiah's letter and far more precise. Alethea wrote that the Duke's refusal had already reached Sir Josiah, and that Pride would not pay tradesmen, creditors, or retainers. Surely Anne did not intend to let a temporary disagreement humiliate her father before all Hampshire. A final line followed. A family might survive poverty more easily than public shame. Anne folded the note. Gabriel watched her expression. Another request. No. She slipped the blue label back into the workbox beneath the removable tray, exactly where it had been. A warning. By the time the last preparations for the summer garden breakfast had been reviewed, Anne had spent nearly 3 weeks at Wilderton and had learned that great houses announced anxiety through small disturbances. A footman crossed the west corridor, carrying more glassware than usual. Mrs. Vale checked the breakfast room twice, despite the gathering being planned for the lawn. 2 gardeners argued in whispers over the placement of potted citrus trees. Somewhere below stairs, a cook demanded additional cream with the urgency of a military dispatch. None of it troubled Anne. What troubled her was the knowledge that Sir Josiah and Lady Crossley would arrive the following morning. Alethea's warning still occupied a private corner of Anne's mind. A family might survive poverty more easily than public shame. It had not been written as a threat, precisely. Alethea was too accomplished for that. She preferred sentences that could be defended later as concern. Anne had answered neither the note nor the implication behind it. Gabriel had not asked her to. That evening, after the final household instructions were given, Anne went to the East morning room. She had begun using it regularly, though never exclusively. The room no longer carried the stale air of a place preserved against time. The windows were opened most afternoons. A few books had shifted because Anne had read them. Her mother's rosewood workbox rested on the small table beside the chair she had chosen near the doorway. The blue lot label, marked 47, remained inside. Beneath the removable tray where she had returned it after showing it to Gabriel, nothing in the room had been rearranged enough to erase the woman who had once favored it. Yet the room had begun to contain new habits as well. That balance mattered to Anne more than she could explain. She was reading near the fire when Gabriel appeared in the doorway. He had changed from the coat he wore for estate business into darker evening clothes. He looked tired, not physically worn, but stripped of the reserve he usually arranged before entering a room. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "No." Anne closed her book over one finger to mark the place. "You look as though someone has informed you tomorrow's breakfast requires a speech. Worse. Mrs. Vale informed me I must appear pleased to see everyone. Can you manage it for perhaps 7 minutes? Then we should arrange the guests in intervals." His mouth moved, but the expected smile faded before it fully formed. He entered the room. Instead of taking the chair opposite Anne, he stopped near the mantel where he had stood the first evening he spoke of his late wife. Anne noticed the choice. "Is something wrong?" Gabriel looked toward the chaise near the fireplace. "No." The answer came slowly. "That may be the problem." Anne waited. He had taught her, without intending to, that silence could be a form of respect when one did not know what the other person was ready to say. Gabriel drew a breath. "My first marriage was arranged." Anne did not move. She knew he had been married. She knew his wife had died 20 months earlier, and that he had been away when her illness became grave. Nothing more. "Not as yours was," he continued. "There was no debt pressed into the middle of it. Our families considered the match suitable. We met several times. We were courteous. We married because it was expected to be sensible." Anne lowered the book to her lap. "And was it?" At first, he looked down at his hands. She thought I was intolerably serious. An extraordinary judgment. His eyes came to hers, and this time a faint smile appeared. She was often accurate. That must have been difficult for a duke. Devastating. The humor disappeared gently rather than abruptly. Gabriel looked toward the fire. "We became friends before I understood that was what was happening. Then something else." Anne felt the room grow very quiet. "Love?" He nodded once. The simplicity of it moved her more than any elaborate declaration could have done. "Yes." She did not ask whether he still loved the woman. It seemed a foolish question. Death altered love. It did not prove it had ceased to exist. Gabriel continued. "When she became ill, I was in London. There were estate matters, parliamentary obligations, correspondence that seemed urgent because men with seals and titles had decided they were urgent." His voice remained controlled, but not empty. Her first letter described a fever. The second said she was improving. By the time the third reached me, the physician had changed his opinion. Anne remembered his words from the earlier evening. I was away. By the time I returned, she was gravely ill. She had not known how much lay between those sentences. "How long did the journey take?" she asked quietly. "Long enough." His jaw tightened. "I left as soon as I understood. I still arrived too late for the conversation I believed we would have." Anne understood without asking for details. He had reached his wife alive, perhaps, but not in the way that allowed all unfinished things to be repaired by presence. Gabriel stared at the fire. "Afterward, everyone told me I had done what duty required. They meant it kindly. It became unbearable. Because duty had taken you away, because I had believed duty could always be postponed for tenderness later. He looked at Anne then. There was no rank in his face, no authority. Only a man admitting the rule he had built around his grief. I decided I would never ask another woman to build her happiness around me. Anne's heart tightened. The words explained too much at once. His refusal to ask affection from her, the way he had made himself almost absent from their marriage while still being considerate in every practical matter. The way laughter startled him. She set the book aside. Gabriel. It was the first time she had used his name without title in a serious conversation. He noticed. "That sounds generous," she said. "I intended it to be. I know." She rose and crossed only part of the distance between them. But refusing to ask is not the same as giving someone freedom. His expression changed. "What do you mean?" "If you decide in advance that another person must be happier without being needed by you, you are still deciding for them." Gabriel said nothing. Anne continued before courage deserted her. "You told me you would not ask affection from me because it would be unreasonable. Perhaps it would be. Perhaps I would refuse. But if you never ask anything because you are afraid of the answer, then the other person never truly gets to choose." The fire shifted softly behind him. "You think I am being a coward. I think you are being careful in a way that protects you as much as anyone else." That landed. Gabriel looked away. Anne did not soften it into something less true. She had spent too many years hearing cruelty disguised as practicality to begin disguising honesty as kindness. After a moment, Gabriel crossed to the chair beside hers. "May I sit?" "Yes." They sat with the small table between them. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Gabriel rested one hand on his knee, palm upward. He did not reach across the space. "May I ask something now?" Anne looked at his open hand. "You may. Will you give me your hand?" The question was quiet enough that her pulse answered before she did. This was not the accidental touch in the carriage. It was not the brief, deliberate closing of her fingers over the lot label. He was asking for contact with no object between them, no practical reason to disguise it. Anne placed her hand in his. Gabriel's fingers closed gently around hers. Nothing hurried. Nothing demanded the moment become more than it was. His hand was warm, steady, and larger than hers. Anne felt the tension in him gradually ease as they sat without speaking. Minutes passed. The room required no explanation from either of them. She looked at their joined hands and thought of how carefully Gabriel had spent weeks, making certain she never felt claimed. Now, for the first time, he had allowed himself to ask for something simply because he wanted it. Anne tightened her fingers around his. Only once. His breath changed. He looked at her. Was that an answer? To which question? "I am not entirely certain yet." "Then you may have to ask better ones." The softness in his expression was almost painful to witness. "I am discovering that." Neither released the other. Outside the windows, the last light faded over Wilderton's lawns where servants had already arranged tables for the morning. Somewhere beyond the estate, Sir Josiah and Alethea were preparing to enter Anne's new life again. Tomorrow would bring witnesses, appearances, family pressure, and whatever Alethea had meant by public shame. Tonight, Gabriel's hand remained around hers because he had asked, and Anne's remained there because she had chosen not to let go. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Wilderton's south lawn had become a careful arrangement of white cloth, polished silver, shaded tables, and guests who believed themselves invited for breakfast rather than battle. Anne knew better. Alethea's note had warned her without naming the weapon, and Sir Josiah had arrived wearing the expression he reserved for occasions when he intended to behave badly beneath perfect manners. Anne met the first carriages beside Gabriel and received the county gentry as Duchess of Dunwich with a steadiness that surprised even her. She remembered names, noticed when an elderly lady needed a chair moved out of the sun, and quietly corrected a footman before a tray of hot chocolate reached the wrong table. Gabriel remained near enough to support her without shadowing her. Twice their eyes met across the lawn. Neither smiled, but Anne remembered the warmth of his hand around hers the previous evening and the way he had asked rather than assumed. That memory made the morning feel less like an examination. Sir Josiah waited until the gathering had settled before approaching her near a line of clipped yews. Alethea remained several yards away in conversation with Lady Fenton, close enough to watch, but not close enough to appear involved. "You look well," Sir Josiah said. "Marriage agrees with you." "How fortunate." "There's no need for that tone. Then don't give me reason to use it." His smile thinned. "Your Grace has become very certain of herself." Anne ignored the deliberate emphasis on her title. "Did you come to breakfast, Father, or to continue the conversation we already finished?" "The conversation isn't finished merely because you said no. It is for me. You underestimate the consequences. You said that before." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "A man in Winchester is willing to extend terms if he receives the correct introduction. Your husband could settle this with one letter." "My husband has already answered. I'm asking you, and I've already answered." Sir Josiah's jaw tightened. "Do you imagine the Crossley name ceased to matter because you now possess a better one?" Anne felt the old reflex stir, explain, soften, prevent his anger. She let the reflex pass. "I imagine my name should stop being used as security for debts I didn't incur. You are my daughter. That is a relationship, not a guarantee." For a moment his face showed something harder than irritation. Then the pleasant mask returned. "Very well." He stepped back. "Enjoy your breakfast." Anne watched him walk away. The ease with which he accepted defeat frightened her more than argument would have done. Gabriel appeared beside her a minute later, not close enough to suggest he had overheard. "Is everything all right?" "No." He waited. Anne appreciated that he did not immediately ask what Sir Josiah had said. He asked again about the lender. "And?" "I said no again." Gabriel's expression sharpened. "Do you want him removed?" Anne looked across the lawn. Sir Josiah was speaking to two gentlemen near the long breakfast table. Alethea had joined him. "Not for asking." Gabriel glanced at her, for refusing to hear the answer. Anne considered that, then shook her head. "Not yet." He inclined his head. "Then not yet." The choice remained hers for less than 15 minutes. Sir Josiah waited until glasses had been replenished, and the guests had gathered loosely near the centre lawn. Someone had made a harmless remark about fortunate marriages. Another guest laughed. Sir Josiah lifted his glass. "On that subject," he said, loud enough to draw attention, "I suppose I must offer His Grace my gratitude. Few sons-in-law can claim to have settled £18,000 before the wedding breakfast was cold." The laughter stopped. Anne felt the silence arrive in stages, first among those nearest him, then at the tables, Moss, then across the entire lawn as people turned toward Sir Josiah, toward Gabriel, and finally toward her. Alethea lowered her glass with exquisite composure. "Josiah," she said softly, in the tone of a wife pretending to restrain a husband she had no intention of stopping. Sir Josiah smiled. "What? We're among friends. No one moved. Anne became aware of every detail at once. The breeze lifting the edge of a tablecloth, a spoon resting against porcelain, Lady Fenton looking down too quickly, Gabriel standing several paces away, utterly still. Sir Josiah continued, "There's no shame in practical arrangements. Anne always understood the family's necessities. She was sensible enough to see that everyone benefited. There it was, not a lie, something uglier. A fact cut away from the truth that gave it meaning. £18,000, a debt extinguished, a daughter who had agreed to marriage under pressure. Stripped of every conversation, every condition, every moment in which Anne had insisted upon her own voice, the story sounded different, calculated, ambitious, perhaps even mercenary. Alethea sighed gently. Anne has always been very dutiful. Anne looked at her stepmother and understood the warning at last. A family might survive poverty more easily than public shame. This was punishment for refusing to be useful. Gabriel moved before Anne could speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Sir Josiah. The baronet turned. "Your Grace, you will leave Wilderton." Sir Josiah laughed once, uncertainly. "Surely there's no need for theatrics. There is no theatre here. There is only your departure." The quiet authority in Gabriel's voice changed the entire lawn. Servants looked toward Mrs. Vale. Guests looked toward Anne. Sir Josiah's face reddened. "I stated a fact. You used my wife's private circumstances for sport because she refused you a financial favor." A murmur moved through the guests. Sir Josiah stiffened. "That is an outrageous interpretation." "Then explain why you raised the matter now." Sir Josiah opened his mouth. Gabriel did not give him room to redirect. "Her Grace's consent, character, and marriage are not subjects for your amusement. You have been told no. You will now go." Anne's heart struck hard against her ribs. Gabriel had defended her, fully, publicly, yet he had not described her as innocent, helpless, or misunderstood. He had named the act itself. Sir Josiah turned toward Anne as if expecting rescue. Once she would have given it, not because he deserved it, but because she had been trained to prevent scenes even when the scene had been created at her expense. Anne met his gaze. You heard his grace. Something broke in his expression. Not remorse, ownership. The shock of a man discovering that a daughter he had always treated as accessible had become unreachable by command. Alethea approached him smoothly. "Come, Josiah." Before turning away, she looked at Anne. "I hope you're pleased," Anne answered quietly. "No, but I'm not ashamed." Alethea's eyes cooled. Then she followed Sir Josiah toward the house, where a footman had already been sent to order their carriage. The silence they left behind was worse than whispers, because everyone was pretending not to decide what the revelation meant. Anne could feel the questions moving through the gathering. Had she known the exact bargain? Had she wanted the title? Had the Duke purchased a wife? Had she purchased rank with submission? Gabriel took one step toward her. He stopped before reaching her. Anne knew what he was waiting for. Permission, even now. Especially now. She could have left. Everyone would have understood. Perhaps they would even have admired the delicacy of a new duchess retreating from humiliation. Anne looked instead toward Mrs. Vale. "Is the coffee still hot?" The housekeeper blinked. "Yes, Your Grace." "Good." Lady Fenton was waiting for another cup. Mrs. Vale recovered instantly. "At once, Your Grace." Anne turned to the guests. Her voice did not need to be loud. "Please continue." "My father has mistaken a private family matter for entertainment. I don't intend to make the same mistake by allowing him to end the morning." Lady Fenton, to Anne's lasting gratitude, lifted her cup first. Then I shall require that coffee. A few people smiled. Conversation restarted badly, then better. Chairs moved. Spoons touched china. The world resumed because Anne had instructed it to. Gabriel remained beside her, not touching her. You didn't have to stay, he said quietly. I know. Do you want me here? Anne looked at him. Yes, he stayed. For the rest of the breakfast, he followed her lead. He did not publicly explain the settlement. He did not turn every guest into a witness for the defense. Anne spoke to neighbors, accepted compliments, ignored several poorly concealed stares, and completed the gathering she had begun. Only once did she look toward the drive where her father's carriage had disappeared. She felt wounded. She refused to become smaller because of it. That evening, when Anne entered the dining room, Gabriel's place was empty. A servant informed her that His Grace had asked for a tray in his study. By the next morning, he had not entered the east morning room. For 2 days after the garden breakfast, Gabriel made himself almost impossible to accuse of neglect and equally impossible to reach. He answered estate correspondence before Anne came down, took luncheon in his study, and appeared at dinner only long enough to ask whether the household required anything from him. On the first evening, he sent word that urgent business would keep him away from the east morning room. On the second, he sent no word at all. The absence was so deliberate that it became a presence of its own. Anne continued her routine. She reviewed household accounts with Mrs. Vale, answered notes from neighboring families who had attended the breakfast, and instructed that no servant was to repeat Sir Josiah's remarks below stairs as entertainment. She did not hide. She did not ask that callers be refused. Yet every time she entered the east morning room, she noticed the chair Gabriel had used during their conversation 3 nights earlier. The room had been opened because Anne had refused to let grief keep it sealed. Now Gabriel had found another way to close a door without touching the handle. On the third morning, Mrs. Vale mentioned that the carriage ordered for Anne and Gabriel's planned visit to a neighboring estate had been changed. His Grace sent word that you may use it alone, Your Grace. He has withdrawn from the call. Anne looked up. Did he say why? Only that he believed you'd be more at ease without him. Anne set down her pen. The words were considerate enough to pass for kindness. That was what made them dangerous. She finished the business before her, dismissed Mrs. Vale with thanks, and went directly to Gabriel's study. She did not enter without permission. When the footman announced her, Gabriel rose from behind his desk. Papers lay in neat stacks before him. He looked as though he had spent 2 days arranging everything he could control. Anne, I was told you cancelled our visit. I thought it best. For whom? His expression tightened. For you. She remained near the door. You didn't ask me. You shouldn't have to endure another room full of people wondering what our marriage cost. I can manage people wondering. You shouldn't have to. That is not the same thing. Gabriel came around the desk, but stopped several feet away. After what your father did, I won't require you to stand beside me as though nothing has changed. Require me? You needn't perform affection or companionship for anyone's benefit. Not mine, not the county's. Anne stared at him. Was I performing 3 nights ago? He went still. No. Was I performing when I asked you to stay beside me on the lawn? No. Then why are you speaking as though every moment between us has become suspect because my father said £18,000 aloud? Gabriel looked toward the window. Because he forced the truth of the bargain into the open. The bargain was never hidden from me. From them, perhaps. And now that they know, You think the honorable response is to disappear? He looked back at her. I think the honorable response is to make certain you understand that your position here doesn't oblige you to me. I already understand that. Do you? Something raw entered his voice. You were given a choice inside circumstances you didn't create. I agreed to a marriage that relieved your father's debt. Whatever respect has grown between us doesn't change how it began. Anne felt the hurt beneath his reasoning then. It was not suspicion of her. It was judgment of himself. So what are you proposing? Gabriel drew a slow breath. Whatever gives you the greatest freedom. If you prefer separate social lives, I'll accept it. If you wish to receive guests without me, you may. If you want the East morning room entirely to yourself, I won't enter it. You never need to accompany me anywhere unless you choose to. At first, the words sounded generous. Then, Anne heard the pattern beneath them. He had decided what freedom must look like and built it out of distance. And if I don't want separate social lives, Gabriel hesitated. You don't have to decide now. That wasn't my question. Anne, if I don't want you to withdraw from every room we have begun to share, what then? He had no answer ready. That was answer enough. She stepped farther into the study. You told me your first wife died while you were away. You told me afterward you decided never to ask another woman to build her happiness around you. I warned you then that refusing to ask isn't the same as giving freedom. His face changed. I remember. You understood the words. You didn't understand the habit. Gabriel flinched almost imperceptibly. Anne continued. My father tried to dispose of me because he believed his need entitled him to decide my future. You would never do what he did. I know that. But you are still deciding what I must want, only in a kinder direction. I'm trying not to hold you to a marriage you entered under pressure. I am already married to you. That doesn't mean I should claim more. I'm not asking you to claim anything. Her voice softened, but not her point. I'm asking you to stop removing yourself before I have decided whether I want you gone. The room went still. Gabriel's gaze fixed on hers. Anne felt the truth of what she was saying before she fully accepted it. She had noticed his empty chair because she wanted him there. She had resented his absence because his presence had begun to matter. The realization frightened her because affection was becoming real inside a marriage that had begun as necessity. Perhaps this was how love first entered a life that had not invited it grandly. Not as certainty, as the ache left by someone choosing not to come into a room. Gabriel spoke carefully. What do you want? At last. Anne breathed before answering. I am staying at Wilderton. I never intended to send you away. I know. I am telling you because I want there to be no confusion. I will continue receiving our neighbors. I will continue the duties I choose as Duchess. I will not retreat because my father embarrassed me. Gabriel nodded once. And me? Anne held his eyes. I want you to stop deciding that I am better without you. His breath caught. Anne, I don't know whether, neither do I. That is the point. We don't know, so stop deciding the answer alone. Some of the certainty went out of him. You have mistaken freedom for absence, Anne said. Gabriel did not defend himself. Yes, he said at last. I think I have. Anne wanted to cross the remaining space between them. The impulse startled her. She did not act on it. Their last intimacy had been his hand offered and hers freely placed within it. This was not the moment to turn hurt into touch. Then begin by keeping the visit, she said. If you want to go. Gabriel gave a faint, rueful exhale. I do. A knock came at the door. The footman entered after Gabriel answered, carrying a sealed letter on a tray from Mr. Peake Your Grace. A messenger brought it from Winchester. Gabriel broke the seal and read. Anne watched his reserve return, though this time it was directed at the page, not at her. What is it? He read the final lines again. A creditor in Winchester has written to Peake. Your father has been seeking new credit. Anne felt no surprise, only cold confirmation. Using what security? That is what the creditor wants clarified. Gabriel looked at her. He has been given reason to believe I stand behind Sir Josiah's borrowing. Anne crossed back to the desk. May I see the letter? Gabriel did not fold it away. Yes. Anne took the letter from Gabriel and read it standing beside his desk. The Winchester creditor had written cautiously, almost apologetically, asking whether Sir Josiah Crossley had authority to imply that future obligations would be viewed favourably by the Duke of Dunwich. No guarantee was quoted. No ducal signature appeared. That made the danger worse, not better. Sir Josiah had apparently learned how much could be accomplished with suggestion. Anne read the passage twice before setting the letter down. He has not forged your name. No, Gabriel said. He has done something more difficult to challenge cleanly. He has allowed another man to believe that my connection with him has financial meaning. Anne looked toward the window. 3 days earlier, her father had humiliated her before county society by naming the exact sum extinguished through her marriage. Now the same marriage was being used to create the impression that new money might be safer because she had become Duchess of Dunwich. Her father had not stopped treating her as useful. He had merely changed the account in which he entered her value. I want to see the original letter from my father, she said. Gabriel's gaze returned to her. The creditor may not have enclosed it. Then I want Mr. Peake to ask whether there is one. Gabriel nodded. I can instruct him. Anne held his eyes. I would rather instruct him with you. There was a pause. Not resistance, recognition. Of course, he said. That afternoon, Mr. Peake came from the estate office to Wilderton with the creditor's inquiry and several notes taken from earlier correspondence. He sat with Anne and Gabriel in the east morning room, where the windows stood open to the mild air. Anne's mother's rosewood workbox rested on the table beside her chair. The blue lot label remained inside it beneath the removable tray. Anne did not touch the box at first. She listened. Mr. Peake explained that Sir Josiah had approached at least one Winchester creditor after the marriage. The creditor had become uneasy because Sir Josiah repeatedly referred to his close connection with Dunwich and to the advantage of having family whose resources were unquestioned. Did he state that his Grace guaranteed repayment? Anne asked. Not according to the inquiry we received, Your Grace. Did he say that I did? No. Then we must be exact, Mr. Peake inclined his head. Quite. Gabriel remained silent. Anne noticed it because he could easily have taken control of the conversation. He did not. Ask the creditor whether Sir Josiah put anything in writing, she said, and ask whether he mentioned me directly. Mr. Peake made a note. Yes, Your Grace. Also ask whether other creditors have received similar representations. Gabriel spoke then, without alarming them unnecessarily. Anne looked at him. Yes, we need facts, not panic. Agreed. Their eyes met briefly. Something had altered since the confrontation in Gabriel's study. He had not apologized yet for withdrawing from her, and Anne had not forgotten the empty chair at dinner. Yet he was doing what she had demanded. He was staying present without deciding the shape of her response. The change was quiet enough that anyone else might have missed it. Anne did not. 2 days later, an answer arrived. The Winchester creditor enclose Sir Josiah's original letter voluntarily for inspection before any decision on further credit. Anne read it beside Mr. Peake while Gabriel stood near the mantel. Her father had written that his recent family arrangements had placed him in the closest connection with a house whose solidity required no advertisement, and that any temporary extension would therefore be undertaken in circumstances materially improved by alliance. He never wrote the word guarantee. He never promised Gabriel's money. He simply left enough space for a hopeful creditor to imagine both. Anne laid the page down. "That is what he does." Mr. Peake looked up. "Your Grace, he does not always lie. He arranges facts until someone else reaches the conclusion he wants." Gabriel's expression darkened. "Then we remove the conclusion." Anne nodded, but her attention shifted toward the rosewood workbox. An older thought had begun to connect itself to the present one. She opened the lid and lifted the shallow tray. The blue lot label marked 47 lay exactly where she had placed it. She took it out. Gabriel recognized it, but Mr. Peake did not. "This was attached to my mother's workbox on the morning His Grace came to Crossley House," Anne said. The appraiser had already begun the household inventory. Mr. Peake took the label only after Anne offered it. He examined the handwritten number, the initials, and the small date notation. "Mr. Hale?" Yes. He would likely have retained his working inventory. Anne looked at Gabriel. "My father has begun telling people that I understood the family arrangement from the beginning. At the garden breakfast, he made it sound as though I had knowingly offered marriage as the solution." "You did not know before that morning," Gabriel said. "I know, you know. That is not the same as being able to show it." She turned back to Mr. Peake. "If Mr. Hale's inventory was already underway before I knew there would be any marriage proposal, then the chronology matters." Mr. Peake nodded slowly. "It would show that the sale process had begun before your Grace entered negotiations." "Exactly." Gabriel looked at the blue label in Anne's hand, then at her face. "Do you want Peake to contact Hale?" Anne heard the question beneath the question. "Do you want this inquiry? Do you want me involved? Do you want to continue?" "Yes." Gabriel did not say he would handle it. He merely nodded to Mr. Peake. By the end of the week, the appraiser confirmed through the solicitor that his duplicate working inventory remained intact. Lot 47 identified one small rosewood ladies' workbox. Its entry carried the same date as the morning Gabriel first came to Crossley House. More importantly, the inventory showed that valuation had begun before Anne had any knowledge of the marriage proposal and had been suspended only after negotiations started. It did not prove every motive. Anne did not need it to. It proved sequence. The creditor inquiry produced more. 2 separate men confirmed that Sir Josiah had referred to his daughter's marriage and his son-in-law's standing while requesting extensions. Again, no explicit guarantee. Again, the same careful implication. Anne sat at the writing table in the east morning room with Mr. Peake's summary before her. Gabriel stood across from her, waiting. There should be one response from Dunwich, she said, not different answers to different men. What should it say? Anne considered the wording, that no Crossley obligation carries a Dunwich guarantee unless that guarantee is expressly given in writing by you. Gabriel nodded. And you, my title is not security either. Then we say so. Anne picked up the pen. No, we say it more carefully. My father will call that family cruelty. He will call any boundary cruelty, if the boundary inconveniences him. She looked up. That sounded dangerously like experience. I have known powerful men before, And now, Gabriel's expression softened slightly. Now I am listening to one powerful woman. Anne felt warmth rise unexpectedly beneath her composure. It was not flirtation. It was something steadier, respect enacted rather than announced. She wrote the principle in her own hand, then passed it to Mr. Peake for formal drafting. No Crossley debt would be represented as carrying support from the Duke or Duchess of Dunwich without explicit written authority. Gabriel read it only after Anne finished. "I agree," he said. No correction, no alteration, no attempt to strengthen it until it sounded like his voice instead of hers. That evening, another letter arrived from Crossley House. Sir Josiah demanded a meeting with several creditors and family representatives before what he called unnecessary misunderstanding destroyed the remnants of his affairs. The meeting would take place at Crossley House. Anne read the final line twice. Her father had written that there was no reason for her to attend. She folded the page. Gabriel, seated opposite her, did not ask what she intended. He waited. Anne looked toward the rosewood workbox, then at the man who was finally learning that presence could be a form of respect. "He expects me not to come," she said. Gabriel's gaze held hers. "What do you want?" Anne placed the letter on the table. "I want him to be disappointed." Gabriel asked to speak with Anne the following morning, and the request reached her in the East morning room. While she was reviewing the final notes Mr. Peake had prepared concerning Sir Josiah's creditors, he did not simply appear at the door as he once might have done. A footman brought his message first. His Grace wished to know whether Her Grace would receive him privately. Anne read the line twice. It was a small change, almost absurdly small, beside £18,000, damaged family credit, and a marriage entered under pressure. Yet she understood what it meant. Gabriel was practicing the thing she had asked of him. He was asking, "Tell His Grace I'll receive him." When Gabriel entered several minutes later, Anne had already dismissed the footman and put aside the creditor correspondence. Her mother's rosewood workbox stood near the candle on the table beside her chair. After the previous afternoon's discussion, she had returned blue lot label, number 47, beneath the removable tray. The cracked brass clasp remained stubborn as ever. Gabriel stopped several feet inside the room. He looked more uncertain than Anne had ever seen him. Not weak, not indecisive, simply without the armor of knowing what the correct action ought to be. "Thank you for seeing me. You asked. I am trying to improve the habit." Anne gestured toward the chair opposite hers. "Then you may sit." He did. For several moments, the only sound was the faint movement of leaves beyond the open window. Gabriel rested his hands loosely together, then separated them as if he had caught himself trying to hold too tightly to something. "I owe you an apology." Anne remained silent. She had heard apologies from her father that began with regret and ended with instructions for how she ought to behave differently. She wanted to know which kind Gabriel intended to offer. He met her eyes. "After the garden breakfast, I told myself I was giving you freedom. I withdrew from meals. I cancelled our visit. I stopped coming into this room. I decided that because our marriage began under pressure, anything I wanted from it must be another burden placed upon you." Anne listened without rescuing him from the discomfort of saying it. "That was not generosity," he continued. It was fear dressed as generosity. Something in her chest tightened. Gabriel looked briefly toward the chair where they had held hands before the scandal. "I spent years believing that goodness meant asking nothing from anyone I might lose. When my first wife died, I made absence into a kind of virtue. If I did not need too much, if I did not ask too much, if I could make myself unnecessary, then perhaps no one would ever have to suffer because of loving me. His voice lowered. Then your father humiliated you in front of half the county. And I decided for you again. I decided you must want distance, because distance would make me feel less guilty about the way our marriage began. Anne's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. You did not doubt me. No, you did not believe my father's version. Never. But you still left me alone. Gabriel closed his eyes for the briefest moment. Yes, the admission was clean. No defense followed it. Anne had not realized until then how much she needed him not to explain the wound away. Why? She asked. Because if I stayed, I would have had to admit that I wanted to stay. His gaze returned to hers, and wanting something from you frightened me more than I understood. The words moved through Anne with dangerous warmth. She would not mistake confession of desire for repair. Not yet. You told me before that you would never ask another woman to build her happiness around you. I remember. You made it sound noble. I believed it was. And now? Gabriel drew a breath. Now I think I used nobility to avoid hearing an answer I could not control. He leaned forward slightly, though he did not reach for her. I called it freedom because I was afraid to hear what you might actually choose. Anne looked at him for a long moment. There it was. Not merely regret, recognition. And if fear returns, she asked, it will. The immediacy of his answer surprised her. That is not very reassuring. It would be worse if I promised otherwise. A faint sadness touched his mouth. The next time fear returns, I ask. Anne waited. And I listen and? He held her gaze. I stay unless you ask me to go. The room seemed to settle around the words. Anne looked toward the open window, buying herself time. She had wanted this apology. She had wanted him to understand the difference between giving freedom and choosing absence. Yet forgiveness was not a switch that could be turned because the correct sentence had finally been spoken. I am still angry with you. You should be. Do not agree too readily. It is irritating. A small breath of laughter escaped him, but he stopped himself from turning the moment into humor. I am sorry. You keep apologizing. I have several things to apologize for. Anne looked back at him. Do not make a profession of it. I would prefer not to. Silence returned, gentler this time. Anne became aware of how tired he looked, not from estate work, from restraint, from the effort of standing inside uncertainty without fleeing it. I cannot promise you forever today, she said. His expression changed, but he did not interrupt. I entered this marriage because circumstances narrowed my choices. Whatever has grown since then deserves better than another decision made too quickly. Gabriel nodded. I understand. Do you? I am learning not to claim understanding before you finish speaking. That almost made her smile. Good. Then let me finish, please. Anne folded her hands in her lap. I cannot promise forever today, but I can tell you what I want now. Gabriel became very still. What do you want? I want you present. The words were simple. Saying them was not. At breakfast. In this room when you wish to be here. At the meeting with my father. In the parts of this marriage we have already begun to share. I do not want you haunting the other end of your own house because you have decided that wanting me is unfair. Gabriel's breath changed. Anne, do not make me regret saying it. I will try very hard not to. She rose. He rose immediately, but he remained where he was. The distance between them was only a few steps. Anne could feel the memory of his hand around hers, the warmth of the gesture in the East morning room before everything became complicated. This was different. No question had been spoken. No object lay between them. She had no desire to let reconciliation become something Gabriel performed for her. If there was to be another movement between them, she wanted it to be unmistakably hers. Anne crossed the room. Gabriel did not move toward her. She stopped before him, close enough to see the uncertainty in his eyes. Then she put her arms around him. For one heartbeat, he did nothing. The pause was so brief that another woman might not have noticed it. Anne did. He was giving her time to change her mind. She did not. Only then did Gabriel's arms come around her, carefully at first. Then, with a quiet firmness that felt less like possession than relief. Anne rested her cheek against his coat and closed her eyes. She could hear his heart beating faster than his composure suggested. Neither spoke. There was no kiss. She did not want one yet. The embrace was enough because it had not been taken. It had been chosen. When Anne finally stepped back, Gabriel released her immediately. His expression was almost painfully open. "Thank you," Anne raised a brow, "for forgiving you. I am not foolish enough to assume that. Good. For staying." The answer softened something in her. "Then help me stay where it matters." She turned toward the rosewood workbox. "We have a meeting to prepare for." Gabriel followed her gaze. "At Crossley House?" "Yes. Do you still want to attend?" Anne opened the workbox, lifted the removable tray, and took out blue lot label number 47. The small square of paper looked insignificant in her hand. It was not. My father first decided what I was worth in the same house where this was tied to my mother's box. Gabriel looked at the label, then at her. "What do you need from me?" Anne met his eyes. "Come with me." He did not say he would take care of everything. He did not promise to protect her from every word her father might speak. He simply answered, "I will." Anne closed her fingers around the blue label. I think my father should see this again. The road to Crossley House had never seemed so short when Anne lived there, and never so long now that she was returning by choice. Wilderton lay only 16 miles away. Yet each familiar turn in the Hampshire road seemed to carry her backward through years of habits she had spent barely 6 weeks learning to question. The carriage moved steadily beneath a pale morning sky. Gabriel sat opposite her, dressed with the severe formality appropriate to a financial meeting rather than a family visit. He had not asked whether she was certain more than once. That restraint mattered. Blue lot label number 47 rested inside Anne's reticule, where she had placed it herself before leaving Wilderton. Her mother's rosewood workbox remained safely in the east morning room. Mr. Peake had the creditor correspondence in his custody. Mr. Hale, the appraiser, had agreed to bring his own duplicate working inventory. Nothing depended upon a document appearing from nowhere. Everything they intended to use had existed before this morning. Gabriel glanced toward the window, then at Anne. "You have been very quiet. I am trying to remember whether the drive always had this many bends. It has. Then I was less impatient when I lived there. Or you had less reason to notice where you were going." Anne looked at him. The answer was not clever enough to be evasive, and not sentimental enough to comfort her falsely. She appreciated both qualities. "I used to think leaving Crossley House would make everything simpler," she said. "And now I know distance is only distance." Gabriel accepted the correction without flinching. Since his apology in the East morning room, he had done that more often. He no longer tried to turn every wound into a problem he could solve before she finished describing it. "If you want to leave at any point today," he said, "tell me." Anne raised one brow. "And if I want to stay?" His expression softened slightly. "Then I stay too," the answer settled between them. Anne looked down at her gloved hands. She could still remember the moment 3 nights earlier when she had crossed the east morning room and put her arms around him. She had not regretted it. That fact frightened her less than it once might have. She did not yet know what their marriage would become. She knew only that she no longer wanted fear to make every decision in advance. The carriage slowed as Crossley House came into view. From a distance, the house looked unchanged. Stone, symmetry, long windows, the same clipped yews flanking the drive. Closer inspection revealed what dignity could no longer conceal. One shutter needed repair. The gravel had thinned near the steps. 2 stone urns that once stood beside the entrance were gone. Anne remembered the inventory labels appearing on furniture the morning Gabriel first arrived. Her father had stopped that particular sale after the marriage negotiations began, but the larger financial decline had not disappeared. Marriage had released one debt. It had not repaired the choices that created the rest. When the carriage stopped, Gabriel stepped down first. The front door opened before the footman could knock. Crossley's butler stood in the entrance, older, somehow than Anne remembered him 6 weeks before. His expression changed when he saw her. He bowed. "Your Grace." The title sounded stranger here than it did at Wilderton. Anne descended. Gabriel offered his hand only as required to assist her from the carriage. He released it when she was steady. Inside, voices carried from deeper in the house. Sir Josiah had clearly begun gathering his audience before their arrival. Anne remained at the threshold for 1 moment longer than necessity required. The entrance hall was almost exactly as she remembered it from the morning of the inventory. Not everything had survived. A narrow console table had disappeared from the west wall. The French clock was gone, yet she could still see, in memory, Mr. Hale moving from object to object with his ledger. 47. She had stood in this hall as a daughter whose father believed duty could be converted into financial value. Today she returned as a duchess, but rank was not what steadied her. Choice was. Gabriel stopped beside her. He did not move ahead. "Where do you want me?" Anne turned toward him. The question reached farther than the hall. It carried the east morning room, the empty dinner chair, the apology, and every moment in which Gabriel had learned that protection could begin by asking where she wished him to stand. She looked toward the open doors of the bookroom, where several men were already visible. Then she looked back at him. Beside me, not before me. Gabriel's gaze held hers. All right. He extended one hand, palm upward. He did not take hers. Anne looked at the offered hand, then placed her own in it. His fingers closed gently around hers. This contact was different from the private hand-holding in the east morning room. There had been grief between them then. Now there were witnesses waiting beyond the door. Anne could have released him after one step. Instead, she kept his hand as they crossed the entrance hall together. She felt the quiet strength in his grip, and more importantly, the absence of pressure. He was not leading her toward the room. They entered it side by side. Sir Josiah stood near the hearth. Alethea sat on the sofa, composed in dove-grey silk. Mr. Peake occupied a chair near a table where several packets of correspondence had been arranged. Mr. Hale stood beside his worn leather case, his duplicate inventory secured inside it. 2 creditors Anne recognized from county business were present, along with another gentleman introduced as the Winchester creditor whose inquiry had reached Mr. Peake. A second solicitor stood near the window. Several respectable local witnesses completed the gathering. The room felt too full for family and too private for court. That suited Anne. This was not a trial. It was a reckoning among people whose decisions had consequences. Sir Josiah looked first at Gabriel, then at Anne, then at their joined hands. His expression tightened. I had not expected you to attend. Anne released Gabriel only after they reached the chairs prepared for them. Your letter made that clear. Alethea smiled with polished regret. My dear, no one wished to distress you unnecessarily. Then today should be easy. I'm not distressed by being informed. Sir Josiah gave a short exhale. We are here to prevent misunderstandings from destroying what remains of this family. Whose misunderstandings? Anne asked. Must we begin like this? We began weeks ago. Today we are simply using complete sentences. Mr. Peake lowered his eyes, perhaps to hide a reaction. Gabriel remained silent. Anne noticed. Once his silence might have frightened her. Today it felt deliberate. He was not abandoning her voice. He was making room for it. Mr. Hale opened his case when Mr. Peake asked whether he had brought the original working records from the inventory. My duplicate book, yes. He placed it on the table. It has remained in my custody since the valuation, and the relevant entries are intact. They are. The Winchester creditor indicated a sealed packet beside Mr. Peake. My original correspondence is there as well. Mr. Peake nodded. Nothing further will be introduced that has not already been disclosed to the parties present. Anne appreciated the simplicity. No theatrical discovery. No last-minute witness rushing through a door. Facts had existed before anyone decided how they should be interpreted. Sir Josiah looked impatiently from one man to another. This is precisely the excess I wished to avoid. My daughter has taken a temporary embarrassment and transformed it into a question of honor. Anne felt Gabriel's attention shift toward her, but he did not move. You transformed it, she said, when you used my marriage to suggest your future debts carried Dunwich support. I did no such thing. Then the letters should be easy to explain. Alethea intervened smoothly. Anne, surely this can be settled without making your father appear dishonest before his own creditors. Anne looked at her stepmother. If he has been honest, I cannot make him appear otherwise. Sir Josiah's control thinned. There, that tone. You return under my roof with a duke beside you, and speak as if you have become morally superior to everyone who kept you here for 28 years. Anne felt the old shame reach for her. It found nothing to hold. I came because you used my name after I told you not to. Sir Josiah laughed bitterly. Your name? You would not have that name without me. Crossley? Anne asked. Or Dunwich? The room went silent. He stared at her. Then his pride made the choice his caution should have prevented. Without me, Sir Josiah said, you would never have become a duchess. Anne opened her reticule. She removed the small blue square of paper and placed it on the table between them. Lot number 47 faced upward. Then perhaps, she said, we should begin with what I was worth before you decided to improve me. Sir Josiah looked at the blue label, as though Anne had placed something far more dangerous than paper before him. For one moment no one spoke. Mr. Hale was the first to move. He opened his worn duplicate inventory and turned several pages with practiced care. Lot 47, Anne said. Would you tell us when you entered it? The appraiser glanced at the notation. The morning of the 9th of May, Your Grace. And what was the item? One small rosewood lady's workbox. Cracked brass clasp. Modest value. Sir Josiah gave a dismissive laugh. What possible relevance can that have? Anne did not look at him. When did you begin the inventory, mister? Hale, shortly after 9 that morning, before the Duke of Dunwich arrived. Yes, Your Grace, before I knew anyone intended to propose a marriage arrangement. Mr. Hale hesitated only long enough to choose his words precisely. I cannot say what you knew privately. I can say the valuation was underway before His Grace arrived. Gabriel remained beside Anne, silent. He had been present that morning. He could have supplied the answer himself. He did not. Anne continued. And when was the inventory suspended? Mr. Hale consulted another entry. Later that day, after instructions reached me that negotiations had begun, which might alter the immediate necessity of sale. Anne finally turned toward her father. You have told people that I understood the arrangement from the beginning. At Wilderton, you let an entire lawn believe I had deliberately offered myself as the answer to your debt. This book shows something simpler. Your house was already being priced before I knew there would be any marriage proposal at all. Sir Josiah's mouth tightened. It shows an inventory, nothing more. Correct. Anne's voice remained calm. I am not asking it to prove more than it does. That restraint changed the room. She saw it in the Winchester creditor's expression. She saw it in Mr. Peake's slight nod. Sir Josiah had expected accusation broad enough to attack. Anne gave him facts narrow enough to survive. Mr. Peake opened the packet before him. With Her Grace's permission, I believe the creditor correspondence should now be addressed. Anne nodded. The Winchester gentleman produced Sir Josiah's original letter, which had remained in Mr. Peake's custody since being voluntarily supplied for inspection. Mr. Peake read only the relevant passage. Sir Josiah had written that his recent family arrangements had placed him in close connection with a house of unquestioned solidity, and that this alliance materially improved the circumstances under which further credit might be extended. You never wrote that His Grace guaranteed the debt, Anne said. Of course I didn't. Sir Josiah seized upon the point. Then we are finished. No, the Winchester creditor spoke for the first time. Because you knew what I was meant to infer. Sir Josiah turned sharply. I stated only that my circumstances had improved. You referred to the Duke repeatedly when I asked what had improved. Another creditor shifted forward. You did the same with me. A third man nodded. And with me, you spoke of your daughter's marriage as if the connection itself reduced the risk. Alethea intervened smoothly. Gentlemen, surely no one can blame a father for taking pride in an advantageous family connection. Anne looked at her. Pride is not the issue. Then what is? Permission. Alethea's composure flickered. Anne turned back to the room. I do not deny that my marriage extinguished £18,000 owed by my father to the Gainsford estate. I will not invent a prettier beginning merely because the truth is uncomfortable. I agreed to the marriage under circumstances I did not create. I agreed because I chose among choices narrowed by another person's debts. What I did not agree to was becoming my father's permanent guarantee afterward. Sir Josiah scoffed. Permanent guarantee. Listen to yourself. I am. Anne met his gaze. That is rather the point. Everything you possess now came from this family. No, some things did. My title did not, my husband did not, my judgment certainly did not. Sir Josiah's face reddened. Your advancement should benefit the people who made it possible. Which people? Your family. By family, do you mean the servants whose wages were delayed? The tradesmen asked to wait? The creditors given assurances you could not meet? Or do you mean yourself? Alethea drew in a breath. Anne. No, we have spent years using one word to hide several obligations. Anne placed her hand beside the blue label but did not touch it. My father said at Wilderton that I understood the family necessities. I did. I understood them so well that I married a man I barely knew to prevent immediate ruin. What I did not understand was that he intended my marriage to become a new instrument of credit. Sir Josiah stepped closer to the table. You speak as though you were sacrificed. I speak as though I was given an impossible choice and made one. A choice that made you a duchess. His voice rose. Do you imagine women are offered dukes every day? Do you imagine you would be standing there with half the county calling you your grace? If I had not arranged the circumstances that brought him to this house. Anne felt the old instinct to shrink. She let it pass through her. Where in that advancement did I cease to belong to myself? The question struck harder than accusation. Sir Josiah stared at her. You are my daughter. That is not an answer. I gave you a duke. The room went still. His restraint finally broke. I gave you rank, security, a house greater than this one will ever be again, and I expect some obedience in return. No one needed to interpret his meaning. He had done it himself. Anne looked at him for several seconds. Thank you, she said quietly. Sir Josiah blinked. For what? For finally saying the part you usually leave for other people to infer. He had no reply. Only then did Gabriel speak. He did not step in front of Anne. He did not raise his voice. There is one matter for which I am responsible. Every face turned toward him. Anne Crossley never approached me regarding Sir Josiah's debt before the morning I came here. She did not design the arrangement. I chose to enter it after speaking with her. I believed I could make that choice honorably by refusing to treat her as property. His gaze moved to Anne for one brief moment. Later, I failed her in another way. After Sir Josiah exposed the circumstances of our marriage at Wilderton, I decided that freedom for my wife required my withdrawal. I made that decision without asking her what she wanted. That failure was mine. Sir Josiah stared at him as though public self-accusation from a duke were incomprehensible. Gabriel continued. There will be no further ambiguity. House Gainsford does not guarantee any Crossley obligation, unless I give such guarantee expressly in writing. The Duchess of Dunwich does not guarantee Sir Josiah's debts by virtue of being his daughter. No creditor should extend money on the assumption that marriage created access to Dunwich funds. The Winchester gentleman inclined his head. That is sufficiently clear. Another creditor closed his notebook. Then we shall assess Sir Josiah's position on his actual assets. Alethia's face went pale. You mean to let this house be dismantled? Gabriel did not answer for Anne. Anne answered herself. This house is not being dismantled by my refusal to provide endless credit. It is being reduced because debts remain. Sir Josiah looked at her with open disbelief. You would watch your father lose everything. No, I will watch you answer for what is yours. Her voice softened, though not from weakness. I do not ask these gentlemen to punish you beyond that. I ask only that my name and my husband's name stop being used to delay consequences by creating new obligations. Mr. Peake gathered the correspondence. Mr. Hale closed his inventory. The meeting did not end with applause. It ended more seriously than that. Creditors began discussing valuation, retrenchment, and what portions of the Crossley holdings could be managed without further unsupported borrowing. Alethea sat rigidly silent. Sir Josiah seemed smaller, not because Anne had humiliated him, but because his authority had finally been reduced to what he could actually command. Anne picked up blue lot label number 47. Mr. Peake approached. Your Grace, if you wish, I can retain that with the relevant correspondence." Anne looked at the little square one last time. Then she placed it in his hand. "Yes, keep it with the record." By evening, the carriage had returned Anne and Gabriel to Wilderton. Her mother's rosewood workbox remained where she had left it, in the east morning room, its cracked clasp unchanged, its shallow tray now covering an empty space where the label had once rested. Anne stood beside the open window while Gabriel remained several feet away. "You were magnificent today," he said. She looked at him. "Careful." "Why? That sounds dangerously like putting me on a pedestal." "Then I withdraw magnificent." "Good. You were very difficult to interrupt." Anne smiled despite herself. "Better." His expression softened, then became serious again. "What happened today changes nothing about what you are free to choose regarding me," she sighed. "Gabriel, I mean it. I know that is the problem." He frowned. Anne crossed the room slowly. "I am tired of men explaining love to me as something I must either pay for or escape from." Gabriel went still. "Anne, I would never ask you to pay for mine." "Then stop offering me escape every time you feel it." The words struck him silent. She stopped close enough to see the uncertainty in his eyes. "You asked me once whether holding your hand was an answer. I told you to ask better questions." "I remember." His voice had gone quiet. "Then ask one." Gabriel looked at her as if all the caution he had ever practiced had narrowed to this moment. "I love you, Anne. I have loved you badly at least once. But I will not hide behind fear again. I love you." Her throat tightened. He did not reach for her. Anne lifted her hand and touched his face first, her palm resting gently against his cheek. His eyes closed for one heartbeat. "I love you too," she said, "and this time no one decided it for me." Gabriel opened his eyes. Emotion stripped the last reserve from his face. "May I kiss you?" Anne answered without hesitation. "Yes." She moved toward him as he bent his head. Their first kiss was gentle, careful, and warm with everything neither had allowed themselves to claim too soon. When they parted, Gabriel rested his forehead lightly against hers, only after she stayed close. Anne smiled. "Tomorrow," she murmured. "I think we should have breakfast in the east morning room." His answering smile was quiet and unguarded. "If you choose it." 3 weeks later, the east morning room at Wilderton no longer felt like a room rescued from grief or claimed by a new duchess. It simply felt lived in. Morning light crossed the carpet in long bands. One window stood open to the early summer air. Several books that had belonged to the late duchess remained on their shelves, undisturbed except where Anne had taken one down to read and returned it carefully afterward. Nothing had been erased to make room for her. Nothing needed to be. Anne's mother's rosewood workbox now rested on the small table beside the chair Anne preferred. Its cracked brass clasp remained exactly as it had been when Mr. Hale entered it into his inventory. The blue paper marked Lot Number 47 was gone, retained by Mr. Peake with the correspondence concerning the Crossley debts. For the first time since Anne had opened the box at Wilderton, the shallow space beneath its removable tray contained no reminder of a price assigned by someone else. Anne noticed the absence occasionally. She no longer needed to touch it. Outside the room, consequences had continued without drama. Sir Josiah had made 2 further attempts to persuade creditors that the Crossley position would recover quickly. Neither had succeeded. Once the Duke and Duchess of Dunwich formally denied any implied guarantee, lenders had begun assessing Sir Josiah only on what he actually possessed. Parcels of land were being reviewed. Several horses had been sold. The household at Crossley House had been reduced further. Outstanding servants' wages had been entered among the estate's real obligations rather than quietly paid by Gabriel to spare Sir Josiah embarrassment. Anne had insisted upon that. "If you pay them privately," she had told Gabriel, "my father learns that consequences are still only temporary inconveniences until someone wealthier becomes uncomfortable." Gabriel had agreed. He had not secretly settled the accounts afterward. That mattered as much as agreeing in the room. Alethea had withdrawn from county society for a time, officially because the strain of financial uncertainty had exhausted her. Anne suspected humiliation had exhausted her more. No one at Wilderton mocked the excuse. Anne had ordered no retaliation, no whispers, and no servants' gossip carried outward under ducal protection. She had spent too many years watching dignity used as a weapon to enjoy becoming skilled with one. Invitations had continued arriving. A few came from families who had been present at the garden breakfast. Others came from people who had heard some version of the confrontation at Crossley House and now seemed eager to demonstrate that they had never doubted Anne at all. She accepted some and declined others. The difference pleased her more than the invitations themselves. Her reputation had been restored among those whose opinion society considered important, yet the restoration felt strangely secondary. She had discovered that public approval was pleasant only after one stopped mistaking it for proof of worth. Gabriel entered the east morning room carrying 2 letters and a small leather folder. He had developed a habit of pausing at the doorway even when the door stood open. Sometimes Anne suspected he did it deliberately. Sometimes she thought the pause had simply become part of the way he entered her spaces now. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. Anne looked up from her correspondence. "You ask that every morning, and one morning you may say yes. What will you do then?" Attempt to survive the rejection with dignity. A difficult standard for a duke. "I have had excellent instruction," she smiled. "Come in." Gabriel crossed the room and sat beside the small table rather than behind any desk. The change was not ceremonial. That was why Anne noticed it. He placed 1 letter before her. "Mrs. Vale and the steward disagree about the western tenant repairs." How alarming. Apparently the roof at Meryton Farm can be repaired before harvest, but only if we delay the stonework at the north gate. Anne reached for the letter. Gabriel's hand moved toward the sealing wax and stopped. He looked at her instead. "What do you think?" Anne held the page without reading for a moment. The question was ordinary. No one would have recognized it as the conclusion to anything. Yet she remembered how many decisions had once been made around her, for her, and because of her, without anyone caring what answer she might give. She remembered her father deciding what duty required. She remembered Gabriel deciding that freedom required distance. Now a duke sat beside an unsealed letter and waited. Anne read the steward's recommendation carefully. "Repair the tenant roof first. The north gate is inconvenient. Rain through a farmhouse roof is more than inconvenient." Gabriel nodded. "Agreed. You had already decided that. I had an opinion. That is not the same thing. I am learning the distinction. Slowly, cruelly." Anne laughed. Gabriel reached for the letter, then stopped again when his fingers came near hers. The hesitation was brief, but she saw it. Months earlier, perhaps she would have wondered whether restraint meant coldness. Now she understood the difference between distance and respect. Gabriel did not need to ask permission for every ordinary touch between husband and wife. He also did not assume that intimacy had become his entitlement Simply because love had been confessed, his hand remained close to hers without closing the distance. Anne looked at it. Then she moved her own hand into his. Gabriel's fingers curved around hers. "There," she said, "a decision." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "I approve. You are becoming dangerously easy to please. Only in highly specific matters." She turned slightly toward him. And what matters would those be? The warmth in his eyes deepened. "You staying?" Anne's expression softened. "I told you I was staying. You did. And I told you I loved you. You did that too. Must I provide written confirmation? Mr. Peake would probably insist on witnesses." Anne laughed again, and this time Gabriel laughed with her. The sound still carried something precious, because she remembered how startled he had been by his own laughter during their marriage negotiations. It no longer frightened him. That, too, was a kind of healing. Anne tightened her fingers around his. "I love you, Gabriel." His humor faded into something gentler. "I love you, Anne." No fear followed the words. No apology for wanting. Gabriel lifted their joined hands slightly, then stopped before bringing hers closer. Anne understood the question in the pause. She answered by turning her hand and brushing her fingers against his cheek. He leaned into the touch for one quiet moment. "You are allowed to kiss your wife," she murmured. His mouth curved. "That sounds suspiciously like permission." "It is." He kissed her gently. There was no desperation in it. No need to prove that the marriage had become real. It already was. Anne leaned toward him freely, and when they parted, she remained close enough that his forehead rested lightly against hers. The silence afterward was comfortable. Beyond the open window, a gardener called to someone across the lawn. Somewhere in the corridor, a servant passed carrying breakfast trays. Wilderton continued around them. Neither shrine nor rescue. Simply a house containing people who were learning how to live honestly inside it. Gabriel glanced toward the rosewood workbox. "Do you ever miss the label?" Anne followed his gaze. "No. I thought you kept it because you wanted to remember." "I did." She looked at the cracked clasp, the scratches in the old wood, the object her father had once failed to value because he could not imagine sentiment as a form of worth. "I remember without needing to possess the insult." Gabriel considered that. Should the clasp be repaired? Anne smiled. "You asked me that once." "I remember your answer." "Then why ask again?" "Because people are allowed to change their minds." The simplicity of it touched her more than he could have known. Anne looked at the workbox. "No, leave it. As you wish, it still closes, imperfectly. So do most worthwhile things." Gabriel gave her a look. Was that wisdom? Do not be alarmed. It may pass. He picked up the household letter again, but did not reach for the wax. "Shall we send this?" Anne reread the final paragraph. Add that the farm repairs should begin before the next heavy rain. Then send it. Gabriel made the alteration in his own hand and passed the page back to her. Anne read it. Only after she nodded did he reach for the seal. On the small table beside them, the rosewood workbox sat where Anne had chosen to place it, its old brass clasp still imperfect and its lid free of any numbered label. Beside it lay the household letter, no longer unexamined and no longer decided by one person alone. Gabriel waited for Anne's answer before reaching for the wax.